Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today we'll be heading over to Conference USA to take a look at the Liberty Flames, who finished 8-4 last season. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on March 1st, but their last actual practice was on March 8th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the one News Advance looks to for local sports and Liberty athletics. He is a UNC Greensboro alum. Some say he's too fast, too furious on tweeting about the Boston Red Sox. He is Bryson Gordon. Bryson can be found at Bryson Gordon on X. Welcome to the show, Bryson.
Appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you so much. No Red Sox talk today. Let's keep it all to football. Devastating stuff going on in Boston right now.
Well, for those who are just turning into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Liberty football?
Absolutely, yeah. So, like I said, I'm a UNCG guy, so I understand the G5 in mid-major form in college basketball. You know, we don't have a football team at UNCG. I grew up in North Carolina. You know, rooted for North Carolina my whole childhood. Still keeping a close eye on them. So, obviously, the Belichick saga is something that I follow him pretty closely. But you know, here I moved to Lynchburg a few years ago to work for the News in Advance. I used to cover city government for the newspaper, actually. So, I've been around here for a few years. This is actually my second full season covering Liberty football. I forget, like I said, kept a really close eye. I have a couple of really close guys who, covered the team before me who I stay in contact with. And so they're great. They're really good people for me to lean on and have a good source with them also. So I did, like I said, second season, I'm loving it. And I'm really excited to be going into this year too. So I think it's going to be the first interesting year really of the Chadwell era, after a year they had last year.
Let's get into that Chadwell era. For those not familiar with Liberty, can you describe the type of offense that the Flames run?
Yeah, they run a two-back offense. So obviously, if you watch them last year, the man that everybody knows from Liberty is Quentin Cooley, and obviously everybody remembers Caden Salter from last year as well. He was a quarterback, ran under center, somebody who had a really good arm, but obviously could make a lot of plays with his feet. Caden Salter is off to Colorado. We'll see whether he starts there or not. I think he's going to have himself a good quarterback competition, but Liberty loves to run the two-back offense, and they run a little bit of option through it. Whenever they had their best season under Chadwell was his first year, obviously 2 years ago when they made the Fiesta Bowl. You think about the memories of that team: Quentin Cooley running the option, Aaron Bedgood running the option out of the slot. They love to play tight ends. Sometimes they'll play two tight ends. Last year it was Bentley Hanshaw, somebody who's gone from the team. And so this is an offense that loves to run the ball. They love to run the ball behind a really strong offensive line, which is something that they've had the last 2 years as well behind offensive line coach Bill Durkin. So I think it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of question marks, specifically with how they play the ball. With how they like to play with the smash mouth style with that option with a guy like Quentin Cooley. There's going to be some changes, and that's where a lot of their weeknesses are this year. So it's going to be interesting to see how they answer those questions.
Well, speaking of change, let's get into the position where it all starts on offense, and that's quarterback. 2-year starter Caden Salter transferred to Colorado, like you had mentioned, leaving Ryan Berger as the only quarterback in this room who took a snap for the offense last year. The Flames also added Michael Merdinger and Ethan Vasco to this room via the portal. What can you tell us about this year's QB battle?
Yeah, I think this is, if you've watched G5 football, you know who Ethan Vasco is, right? He spent last year at Coastal Carolina. He's bounced around in college football a couple places, but he was at Coastal Carolina last year. A really good arm. I think he's somebody who doesn't get as much credit for having the kind of arm that he does. People know about his running ability. He scored a handful of touchdowns last year on the ground, and that's something that he can bring to his game. I wouldn't, quite call him Caden Salter in the dynamic category with how he can use his feet, but he's certainly somebody who can move the chains with that. And so that's going to be interesting to see how he fits into the Liberty offense that, usually likes to use their quarterback to run the ball a little bit, especially when they had Caden Salter. And so looking at the quarterback battle, you mentioned Ryan Berger is one guy who comes back with some significant experience. He started in the Bahamas Bowl and actually got injured in the Bahamas Bowl and had to leave the game. He suffered a couple concussions late in the season last year, or had concussion-like symptoms, and was in protocol a few times. And so he didn't play a lot during spring camp. His status was kind of up in the air for a lot of that. He didn't play during the spring game either, but he's still somebody who's expected to factor into the competition just because of his experience. And once again, if you're a G5 fan, you've seen him at Appalachian State. He played there in their season opener 2 years ago before hurting his hand and missing the rest of the season. And that's when Joey Aguilar kind of really stepped up and took the reins of that team and really turned them into the offense that they were 2 years ago. and he really made a name for himself. So Berger and Vasco are the two guys who we're going to factor in. The third guy you mentioned is Michael Merdinger, the North Carolina transfer who's taken a step down from the power conference level, coming to Liberty. And you mentioned the competition. It's spring, right? So maybe there's not a whole lot to take away from it. But Merdinger was the guy who rolled out with the ones during the spring game. And so they obviously like his ability. The coaches have raved about his leadership skills and what he brings to the team as far as intangibles. So I think he's somebody who writing him off in the quarterback competition would probably be a little foolish, given that he started in the actual spring game. And so it's going to be fun. It's going to be the first time under Chadwell that they've truly had a quarterback competition. I'm excited to see how that looks under him, because his first year he had Caden Salter on the roster. They ran through a little bit of a competition. There was still the assumption that it was going to be Salter's team. Last year, there was absolutely no question that it was his team. So this will be his first time, going into fall camp, not truly knowing, who his number one option is. Maybe a lot of people would assume it would be Vasco because of his experience starting elsewhere. But like I mentioned, he was there in spring, and Merdinger got to start in a spring game over him. So it's at least something to think about.
Well, looking at these quarterbacks and their play style, are they all similar, or are they all a little bit different? That depending on who gets the nod there to start, that the offense would change just a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's some similarities in each of their games. I think if you're comparing two of them to each other, you're probably looking at Ryan Berger and Ethan Vasco as guys who are a little bit more similar to each other, just because Berger, people talk about his arm. He kind of was known for his arm when he came over from App State, but he also showed a little bit of a running ability last year, and he broke off a huge run against Buffalo in the Bahamas Bowl, right out of the halftime break. So he's somebody who has shown the ability to make plays with his legs. I wouldn't, if we're talking Caden Salter is up here, right, as far as dynamic ability with your feet, I would put Vasco here. I'd put Berger maybe a little bit below him. But those are guys who I would say are comparable in their play styles in Vasco and Berger. Now you look at Merdinger, he's somebody who's completely different, right? He's somebody who likes to sit in the pocket. If you watch North Carolina play Connecticut in the Fenway Bowl, you got to see him. He was somebody who really had no opportunities with Carolina last year, was way buried way down the depth chart. And then Jacoby Criswell gets hurt early in the game, and Merdinger is tossed in. And he there's some good throws there, but he looked like he was maybe a little bit out of his depth in that game, given the situation. Obviously, thrown right into run quarterback one in a bowl game situation with a ton of backups. UNC was really ravaged in the portal in that game. So seeing his game, I think he's more of a pocket passer. He's somebody who has a really good arm. The coaches have raved about his arm also, in addition to his ability to kind of be a leader in the team and leader in the huddle. And so I would, like I said, ruling him out of the quarterback competition would be kind of crazy. I think he's somebody who, if they're looking for some help with this receiving core, which was one of the biggest problems with the team last year, I think Merdinger is somebody who might be able to pick up the passing game pretty quickly. Now,
this room's pretty deep. Last year, they had Jaden Bradford. He's a redshirt freshman this year. And then they bring in their highest rated QB ever to sign with Liberty, another true freshman. Can you tell me about these two?
Yeah, these guys are not to be ruled out either, I don't think. Bradford, obviously the hype was around him when he came in from IMG Academy last year, and he didn't play during his freshman year, sat out. It was redshirt year for him, and that was expected. There were, obviously a guy like Caden Salter on the roster, and Ryan Berger right behind him in the depth chart. There was no need for him to get into any games, and so he sat out. But unfortunately, he suffered an injury late last season in practice, which caused him to have off-season surgery. So he missed all of spring ball, or at least until, through the spring game. He possibly got into some practices right after that into their last little bit, but he's somebody who didn't really see any meaningful reps in spring. And so it's hard to really gauge where he's going to be at in the competition. But it's important to note that he's on the roster because they loved his ability when he came to campus last year. Somebody who, obviously, you talk about arm talent. He was rated before Ethan Houck signed as the highest rated arm, highest rated quarterback in program history. So this is 2 years in a row that they've done it. And you mentioned Houck already. The athletic ability of this kid is incredible. Offensive coordinator Willie Korn called him a Greek god. He described his body as looking like that. And so if you're looking for a young guy to kind of build your program around, nothing better than a Greek god to have, as an 18-year-old to kind of put that into your roster and be able to mold that over the next couple of years. Obviously, it's college football. You don't know how long he's going to stick around, kind of things like that. But to have that potential in the program, I'm sure they're going to want to see what he has quickly. And so Houck is somebody who, you mentioned a huge arm. You don't become that highly rated out of high school without a huge arm, but he's also got the ability to run with his legs. He ran a couple times in the spring game and looked pretty good for somebody who at that time was a third string quarterback. So I think those are two guys who are really good depth options for Liberty down the road. I think the quarterback situation this year has a little bit more question marks around it just because of the, experience of Vasco and the experience of Berger and, also Michael Merdinger to see who's going to start. But when you look at it from a long-term perspective, I think there's a lot more answers there. When you mentioned Merdinger also, he's a freshman too. So there are some long-term solutions at quarterback. I think it's just going to be a matter of finding who's the answer this year for them.
All right. We got to figure out who that is. Who do you feel is going to take that edge and take that first snap against Maine week 1?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Vasco. I mean, obviously, you talk about Merdinger starting the spring game. That's a big deal. I don't think it's nothing, but it's also – it's 5 months before they play, and in Liberty's case, almost 6 months before they play their first game. And so, with the experience of a guy like Vasco, I think his leadership ability is something that they have talked highly of. Also, coming over from Coastal, he's like I mentioned, kind of the most similar to what Caden Salter played like last year and played like in his 2 seasons at Liberty, as far as a talent perspective, as far as an abilities perspective. So I think he's going to be the easiest fit to bring into the offense style that we mentioned, right, that Liberty likes to run is an option style. There's going to be some changes to that this year with some of the players that they have in the backfield, some of the personnel. I think it's going to look a little bit different. And I think the player that can get probably the most out of those kind of guys would be Vasco, just because of his ability to run. So I think whatever they go out there against Maine on August 31st, I think he'll take the first snaps. Do I think he'll take the first snaps of every single game next year? That's a tougher question. I don't know. He's a really good player, but if they like Merdinger a lot and they feel like they maybe need to keep him around, maybe he pushes for some action next year. So I think they're in a good situation compared to where they were last year, where, if Caden Salter, was your guy, everybody thought Ryan Berger was okay, but there were no real depth options on the team.
So, you got Maine, and I don't anticipate he'll be the only quarterback that takes snaps against Maine. They'll probably kind of rotate a couple guys. Where do you think of that, break point? Like, hey, we've got to make a decision on our quarterback by this game going forward, and we can't play this roulette just based on the schedule that Liberty has.
I think it's going to be early on. I mean, you talk about tough games right out of the gate. Maine is probably not one of those, but they have Jacksonville State, right, the defending Conference USA champions on the road, their first conference game of the season right out of the gates week 2. So that's going to be a really tough contest for them. I think they're going to have to figure out before that game and be really confident about who, they're going to be putting under center in that one, because that's a team that last year kind of came out of nowhere in Conference USA to win. Obviously, Rich Rodriguez is up at West Virginia now, and so there's going to be some changes there. But you look at the talent that was on that team last year; they've lost a lot. I still think that they're going to be one of the better teams in Conference USA, and it's going to be a tough environment. Obviously, Conference USA opener for pretty much the entire season for both of these teams, and so it's going to be exciting. I think they're going to have their quarterback nailed down and have a pretty good game plan going into that game.
Well, moving on to the running game, the duo Billy Lucas and Conference USA first-team All-Conference Quentin Cooley have both graduated at least 327 rushing attempts, 1,975 yards, and 18 touchdowns up for grabs here in 2025. The Flames do return the likes of Caden Williams, Kyle Hanks, and a guy that I've been waiting to bust onto the scene, that's Vaughn Blue. This team also added Evan Dickens via the portal. He was last at Georgia Tech. How did this room look this spring?
Yeah, there's a lot more a lot of new faces, a lot more faces in this room. You mentioned everybody and yourself waiting on Vaughn Blue to break out. I think that's everybody in Lynchburg. Somebody who came in with a lot of expectations and a lot of hype, played really early on in his career and had an injury his freshman year, and then last year there just wasn't that. It didn't seem like there was the opportunity there for him, honestly. If I had to be honest, he got there were a lot of games where he kind of hovered between 3 to 5 carries a game, and so when you have a guy like Quentin Cooley and you want to get him the rock, and that was your best offense last year, maybe he falls out of the rotation a little bit. But yeah, Vaughn Blue, somebody who looks great on the field. You mentioned somebody who has a really good, really physical back, really strong back. He's somebody who I think is going to be a huge factor into the option game again this year with the way Liberty likes to run. The room overall, I would say probably there's a lot of question marks, but there's a lot of guys. And I think that's the interesting thing is you want to talk about Evan Dickens, somebody who comes from, Georgia Tech with some high major experience. That's probably an answer to the Quentin Cooley question. You can put him into the backfield. He didn't really have a whole lot of work during the spring game, but I think he's somebody who can step in and take a lot of volume. Vaughn Blue is a big piece of that. Also, I think the X factor for the Liberty offense overall, but more specifically at running back, is going to be Juju Gray. And he moved over from wide receiver last year, where he was kind of banged up for most of the season. He never really got the opportunity to be 100% healthy and run out there for multiple weeks at a time and not have a nagging lower body injury. Late in the season, he was kind of dinged up as well. And so I think when you look at him as a running back in the Bahamas Bowl against Buffalo, it didn't look great. That was behind a completely makeshift offensive line that's been, kind of remodeled here in the portal. So I think he's a guy that they're going to really want to run a whole lot through, just because of his speed, his ability to get out in space and make people miss. I mean, Juju Gray, if you need a case to see why Liberty coaching staff thinks so highly of him, just watch him against Middle Tennessee State last year. When he had 2 touchdowns, he had a huge punt return all year, kick return last year. He's somebody who Liberty counts on to be a spark plug. And so I think with him being in the backfield now, I think he's somebody to keep an eye on in the back of this room, and somebody who can really elevate not just his own game, but this whole room. Because if you have to pay a lot of attention to a guy with that kind of speed, it makes everything easy for the whole room.
Well, with Juju moving over, like, what kind of role do you see him playing? Like more like a change of pace, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, he's probably not going to be the Quentin Cooley kind of B-back style that he was last year, just because there's a big weight discrepancy there when you look at them side by side. But if you remember 2 years ago when Liberty made their run to the Fiesta Bowl, Aaron Bedgood, number 82, was a guy who had a huge play on the first drive of that Fiesta Bowl. He's somebody who really found his role later in the season once Liberty kind of got established in their offense that season. And I think that if you go back and watch the highlights of 2023 Liberty and you see Aaron Bedgood, I think that's what you're going to see pretty much exactly from Juju Gray. Somebody who, all right, we're going to hammer you with some strong, in between the tackle running, maybe some Vaughn Blue in there. Caden Williams is somebody who is going to be able to run through the tackles as well. And then also let's get out in space to Juju Gray. Let's get some swing passes going on. He's a really speedy back. He can run upfield, in some wheel routes. So I think he's going to be somebody who can completely, should he stay healthy, change the offense for Liberty, because he can kind of mold and hybrid that running back role with that wide receiver room, which was also, another major question for this team last year.
Did anyone kind of step up in the spring? You mentioned Evan Dickens, but in your mind, did anyone kind of step up in the spring to kind of assume that Quentin Cooley or RB1 role?
I think it's going to be a lot of taking over Cooley stuff by committee, so it's going to be touch and go on that. But one guy I mentioned already was Caden Williams. I think he's somebody who's going to see a lot of touches next year. He's really strong. He's a little bit I think he's 5'10", not necessarily an overpowering back, but he's a pretty strong guy. He saw a lot of work in the Bahamas Bowl last year as well, and so I think he's going to get some action this year with the ones. He saw some action in the spring game with the ones. And another guy way down the depth chart you mentioned, maybe not going to get some opportunities this year, but Malachi Fannin Render is somebody who had an electric run in the spring game. And you talk about Ethan Haupt getting some love from the coaches. This guy got even way more love than Haupt did from the coaching staff during spring and whenever they were going through the signing process of getting him on campus. And so there's some hype down the roster. I think Williams is a guy who's probably going to step up into a lot of that. Dickens is somebody who's going to see a lot of that B-back work as well. But you mentioned so many guys in this room, so many faces, that it's really going to be, if they can get this offensive line answered, get the right pieces in the right spots, it's really going to create some opportunities for several guys in this running back room.
How would just trying to differentiate between maybe Caden Williams, Evan Dickens, and Vaughn Blue, like, where do you see the strengths of those three guys?
Yeah, I think with Dickens and Blue, I think those guys are probably more similar. And Blue, for all of Blue not playing last year, right? I still think he brings a lot, because he's somebody who can also get out in space and run between the tackles. We've seen him play. His first touchdown at Liberty came in the passing game. He didn't have his first rushing touchdown at Liberty until this past season. So he went a lot of his career without having one. So I think he's somebody who can have an element in the passing game, while Dickens is somebody who's really going to be that run between the tackles kind of guy. I think, obviously at Georgia Tech was somebody who, whenever he saw the field, was pretty efficient. I think he can do that at Liberty also, because you've seen guys, come from the ACC. Quentin Cooley is a perfect example of, maybe he didn't have, necessarily the role at Wake Forest that he had at Liberty, but when he came over and he got that workload, he showed that he had the talent and the ability. So I think Dickens is going to be a guy who could potentially do that in there. And then you mentioned Caden Williams. He's probably more a little bit along the lines of, Dickens, in that where he can kind of run up the middle. I don't see him playing into the passing game just as much as Juju Gray and even Vaughn Blue can. But I think he's somebody they can punch in there inside the 5 and maybe get you a touchdown or two.
Given all this talent here in the Liberty backfield, if you had to guess today which running back gets that first carry against Maine, who you got?
I'm going to go Gray. I think they'll give it to Juju Gray just because this is a guy you don't move him off of a wide receiver spot for nothing, right? I think they're really excited about the speed that he has, and so when we saw him on the field last year, it was such a game changer. In the return game, in the run game, in the pass game, and so I think he's going to be the guy that if this offense is really unlocked and kind of returns to the 2023 levels, they're going to have to go through him, and so I think they're going to want to get him going pretty early in the season.
Well, there's some unknown in other position rooms. The wide receiver room looks to be in pretty good shape. The Flames did lose their leading receiver in terms of yardage from a season ago in Trayon Sibley. However, they return everyone else who registered a catch for the Flames in 2024. Did anyone stand out to you during the spring?
Yeah, there were some big additions at receiver in the spring. I think, obviously last year that was one of the biggest question marks on the team was that where did this receiving game? Obviously, CJ Daniels was such a big player for them in 2023, but how did the receiving game fall off that much in just 1 year where that became such a problem for them last year? And there were some guys who I thought played really well. Elijah Canyon's one of them. He's made a big move inside from outside into the slot, and he's going to have a different impact on this team. Tyson Mobley is somebody who got to start during the spring game. I think he's going to be a much improved player for them. And you mentioned G5 experience. He was at Coastal Carolina before coming over to Liberty and playing there last year. So G5 fans have heard of him also. I think one guy who really impressed me in the spring game was Casey Kane, a UNLV and Texas guy who came over to Liberty this year to answer, to kind of solve some of these wide receiver issues and be able to take some space off down the field. He scored a couple times in the spring game. He was kind of banged up early in the spring when he first got to campus and was slow moving and getting into the offense and getting into the structure of spring ball. But I think once he kind of got the grasp of it, you saw his connection during the spring game. And look, let's talk about spring games. Some coaches call them showcases. Some coaches don't really run anything serious. Half of the guys don't even have, contact jerseys on. You can't even touch them. But I think in Kane's case, he showed a little bit of why he has the potential to be the separator on this team and create space and get downfield and be a really good take the top off the defense guy for somebody like Vasco or Merdinger, which can, re-unlock this run game that, last year was, kind of held down, I would think, a little bit because of the lack of passing game. And so those are three of the guys that I thought looked pretty good in spring. Overall, I think this room might be the most improved of any on the entire roster, given where it was at a year ago. So I think there's exciting pieces to talk about, on this team at wide receiver.
Now, you talked about Elijah Canyon's move and being an impact, moving from the outside to the slot. For those maybe not familiar with who or what he looks like, why is that a big deal?
Elijah Canyon in the slot is like taking the a NBA center and putting him at point guard, and then saying that we got a new point guard. But I think it's going to work because Elijah Canyon is a 6'5" wide receiver who played at Purdue before coming to Liberty. He's a big physical guy. He looks like a tight end out there. You could line him up on a line. And he would honestly pass as one in some situations. And so they're moving him into the slot. I think he's going to be able to have a little bit more of an impact there. And that's a role that's kind of vacated by Juju Gray. He played a lot of that last year. And so with Canyon moving in there, he's got some pretty decent speed. He's got a really good ability to catch contested balls. And usually you don't think of that necessarily from the slot, but I think it's going to be a position for him where he's going to be a huge target for whoever the receiver is kind of coming over the middle of the field. If he's willing to get in there and take some hits, which I think he's shown, he'd probably be willing to do that. I think he's going to be an exciting piece, and it's going to be an interesting look to see such a big guy lining up on the inside in the offense.
What wide receiver trio do you think we see out there week one?
Yeah, it's going to be different from the spring game, right? So I wrote down who started in the spring game at receiver. It was Jamari Person, who it's a Colorado State transfer who comes to Liberty in the transfer portal. Tyson Mobley and Elijah Canyon. Obviously, I think Canyon's going to start. I think he's going to stay in the slot, but I think there's going to be changes. Reese Smith is somebody who Liberty fans remember from last year as being kind of in and out of the lineup as a guy who was hurt a lot of the season, dealt with some knee injuries. He came over from West Virginia early in his career, and when he first got to Liberty 2 seasons ago, he dealt with knee injuries also. So he's really been hampered by the injury bug. But when he's been on the field, he was the favorite target of Caden Salter last year, even when they had Trayon Sibley out there. This is a guy, Reese Smith, who had 3 catches in the game, or 3 touchdown catches against East Carolina in the late night game then. Really started to find himself the more he was out on the field last year. I think that if he can have a healthy offseason which, might be a big ask of him considering some of the off seasons he's had previously with some of the injuries he's had. But if he can have a healthy off season to make it to, Maine, I think he's going to be somebody you see out there on the first drive. And I think one of the transfers will, make it. I think it's either Jamari Person or Casey Kane. I think if Kane is healthy, given what we saw from him in the spring game, coming off of injury, he's somebody who, if he can pick up the offense despite the injuries pretty quickly, I think he's going to learn and find himself in the starting three for the wide receiver, on opening night.
Let's move over to this tight end room. And to someone that's never watched a Liberty football game, how would you describe how they utilize the tight ends?
They utilize them there's no telling where you're going to see him, right? Last year was a great example is Bentley Hanshaw. He's somebody who is really key in the run game. We mentioned the two-back system that they like to run. Well, if you're going to run two backs, you need somebody to block for, your back, in addition to the other back who's not running the ball. And so they use their tight ends a lot in the run game. They also use them a little bit in the passing game. If you want a good example of that, think about to when Liberty played Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. The only touchdown they had in the game was to a tight end, Bentley Hanshaw. On some action. So I think this is a room that under Chadwell has been a little bit up and down. I think they're still looking for that really, really go-to guy at tight end who can be somebody who is a huge impact in the passing game, but also really connect and play a big piece in the run game, which is what they really need them to do. And, be able to open up some holes for some of these dynamic backs that they have. And so I think this is a position where we're getting into, third year for Jamie Chadwell. He's starting to get some of his guys on the roster and through the portal who he really likes to fit his offense. And so I think there's some interesting guys on the roster this year, more specifically at the top of the depth chart, who can be really important for what he likes to do.
Well, speaking of Bentley Hanshaw, he moves on, but who stood out to you in the spring maybe to kind of step up and take his role?
Yeah, it was a position with some injuries. I think Jacob Jenkins is somebody who was working back from some stuff. Austin Henderson was working back from a late season injury also, so they didn't do a whole lot. I didn't have Jacob Jenkins, somebody who played in the spring game. I still think he's going to be, the most impact player in this room, because last year, whenever, Bentley Hanshaw went down with a late season injury, Jenkins was somebody who stepped up and really became, a short yardage tight end for them. They could really go to them in, 3rd and 4 and work him over the middle. He caught a couple of touchdowns last year, inside the 5-yard line. So he's somebody who Caden Salter could go to when he needed some, needed short yardage or needed a surefire catch. But he's also a really important guy in the run game. He comes from Coastal Carolina 2 years ago. Once again, another transfer. We could say this for a lot of these guys, another G5 transfer, but he's somebody who comes over with some experience of, playing in the offense. So he really connected with Chadwell when he got on the field this year. I think you saw that special ability of his to, kind of leak out and get himself open. And I think he's going to be somebody who will have most of the snaps at tight end this year, assuming, Austin Henderson is back. If he can work himself back from, that injury last year, I think those are going to be the two guys you see most of the time at tight end.
And when we're talking about that running back room, we talked about, the offensive line finding its footing. Well, in my opinion, this offensive line probably takes the biggest hit here in 2025. Right guard John Paul Flores has graduated, and a pair of Conference USA first-team all-conference guys like left guard Jordan White and right tackle Xavier Gray, they've transferred. On top of that, left tackle Jordan Hall, who played a key piece in their 2-deep. He also transferred. That means center and CUSA first-team all-conference Aaron Fenimore and left tackle Jack Tucker will be anchoring this new look offensive line in 2025. Given those losses to the unit, what are the expectations heading into 2025?
Yeah, I think the expectations are for this new group to learn quickly because they're going to have to. They have no other choice. They're going to have to learn on the job, and some of them also. So this is a group that under assistant coach, offensive line coach Bill Durkin. This is a group that under Jamie Chadwell in these 2 years has been the best unit, even with a guy like Caden Salter at quarterback and a guy like Quentin Cooley at running back. This is the unit, in my opinion, that has been the best under Chadwell and under Bill Durkin, just because they've had some continuity. You mentioned some of the guys who have left. Jordan White, somebody who started the last 2 years and was on the team when they went to the Fiesta Bowl. He transferred up into the Power Conference ranks. Xavier Gray, somebody who was at Akron way before coming to Liberty, started for several years, started on the team when they went to the Fiesta Bowl, started every single game this past year when he could play, and is somebody who transferred up to the Power Conference ranks. JP Flores was a really talented player, for them, and when he was on the field last year, was a great player for them at right guard. He graduated, so they've lost some really important pieces. And you mentioned the ability for this team to have to learn quickly. There are so many new faces, and there are so many new faces from all different levels. They have junior college guys who are coming up. They have high school guys who are coming up. They have power conference transfers down. They have group of 5, conference transfers over. They're really just kind of trying to get as many bodies as they can, and and then kind of solve their issues from there. I think this is a room that, like I mentioned, under Bill Durkin, has been able to adapt quickly. And so with some of the flexibility of some of these guys, I think they're going to be able to figure it out and put together a pretty efficient offensive line. But whether it comes down to having the abilities or whether it comes down to having the potential that it had the last couple of years with White and Gray, who were all conference performers, I don't know if I quite see that kind of level of guys, right here, right now, 5 months before the season starts. So we're going to have to see some improvement from some of these guys who are going to be taking these roles.
Is there anybody that kind of stepped? I know in the spring it's probably hard, but did anybody kind of like stand out to you? You talked about having JUCO, G5, P4 transfers coming in. Is there anyone that's standing out to you?
Yeah, I think obviously offensive line. There are some guys who are back that are going to be coming into starting roles, who are going to be anchoring spots like right guard Harry Hayes, center Aaron Fenimore, left guard Jack Tucker. So there are a couple positions that are open. I think at right tackle is an important one. Hunter Porterfield, is a guy who wasn't really on the depth chart, didn't play a whole lot. But this year, he starts in the spring game, and he's a really important piece for them, at right tackle. So he's somebody who could potentially be a part of the line, and somebody who maybe has impressed coaches enough to really earn some ability to crack the lineup. DJ Geth is somebody who could see himself starting. He's really going to be a competition there, on the guard spots. And so he might be able to, take another step up. He's somebody who transferred from North Carolina. So he transferred down to the G5 ranks to, kind of build himself into somebody who is a special player. And that's something that they've had success with, right? You mentioned Jordan White already. He's a West Virginia guy. So he's come down and Bill Durkin has been able to, really turned him into a special player. Same with Xavier Gray. He really made him into a special player. And 2 years ago, Xavier Gadlin, somebody who was really special for this team also. So he's been able to take these guys, get them for a few months and really build them into special pieces. You mentioned some of the transfers too. Trey Badowski is somebody from UAB who's going to be important in that. Christian Williams is another transfer from Florida who's going to be big for that. So they're going to have to really get some of these guys and hopefully, I'm sure in their eyes, think that the talent is good enough to where they could just get them and plug them on the line and say we can figure it out and against some of these Conference USA defenses. And they've had success doing it in recent years.
So they got to figure it out. Who does the offensive line look to for that leadership?
I mean, yeah, there's no question. It's Aaron Fenimore on that one. This is a guy who last year at center, stepping into that role, he wasn't even expected to be the starting center on opening day. So it's a pretty cool story for him. Jordan White is somebody who was this starting center for them whenever they went to the Fiesta Bowl. He was an anchor on the offensive line. And then there was an injury to John Paul Flores during fall camp last year, which kind of moved him out of the lineup for 6 to 8 weeks. And it was such an easy switch to take Jordan White and move him off of center and put him at left guard because that's where he played before coming to Liberty. And so whenever that happened, Liberty had a need for a center. Aaron Fenimore was the next one on the depth chart. And so he was a redshirt freshman and stepped up, and he started every game and played effectively enough to become a freshman All-American, according to The Athletic. And so he's somebody who really improved his own game. But when you think about Aaron Fenimore and what he brings to this team, so much kind of in the locker room too. Late in the season last year, once he kind of started to get his footing as a center on the team, he really started talking to the media more. The team started kind of pushing him out into events more as this kind of face of the program. He started jumping on, the coaching radio show and talking with Jamie Chadwell. So he's really put himself out there as kind of the leader of this team. I think in general, I think he might be, quote unquote, if you're going to say a face of the team. I think with the year he had, at center, it's kind of quote unquote not sexy to think of a center as being the face of the team, but the leadership I think he provides and the connectivity that he has with the coaching staff, I think he's the guy who they look to as not just a leader of this offensive line, but kind of the leader of the team. Only
on the G5 Hive will we get in depth talk about those guys up front, talking about their leadership. That's why you tune in.
The boss hogs in there. You got to give the hogs some respect.
Well, Bryson, it certainly seems like there's a lot of opportunities available for guys this year heading into 2025. But if you had to pick one offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
Yeah, I think it's a guy I've given a lot of love to, so I'll give him a little bit more. But I'll take Juju Gray. I think this is a guy who potentially, this time next year, or maybe a little bit after the season next year, where people will be looking at as a guy who really unlocked the Liberty offense just because of how many positions he can play in and so many positions he can be effective in, not just out of the backfield, but he's somebody who can, like I said, get downfield and really open up some space for this offense in general. He's somebody who, if you need him to just take a pitch out of the backfield and take it for 5 yards, he can do it. I think he's somebody who, if Liberty is going to be their most effective self in 2025 and kind of get back to what they looked like in 2023 on the offensive side of the ball, it starts with a player that looks and plays like Juju Gray having that kind of success. And so he's a player who can fit that mold perfectly and really give them that electricity on offense.
Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. And before we get into the personnel, can you describe that defensive scheme the Flames run there for our listeners?
Yeah, they play a multiple 4-2-5. They have a joker who is a little bit of a hybrid linebacker defensive end position. And last year it was held down by CJ Bazille, who is back. And he's somebody who really creates a lot of havoc, kind of playing over the middle of the field and being able to come down and step down and put his hand in the dirt and play on the line. It's a really exciting defense whenever it's cooking. Unfortunately for Liberty, with the situation they've had in the transfer portal, so much of the talent that you expect to be flying off the edges for this team has kind of been taken away. And so I think it's really going to change how they have to play. They're going to have to put a lot more trust into the back end of that defense, and if they're going to have a lot more success in being able to stop the passing game this year. So it's an interesting format. It's an interesting defensive scheme given the people that they have on the roster now, and with the attrition that they've had. But they're obviously not changing it. I think that they are very confident in their flexibility between all their defensive backs. I think they take a lot of pride in their cornerbacks being able to step over and play safety and vice versa. And so there's really a whole lot of flexibility and hybridness in the Liberty defense. And so with the personnel that they have this year, it's going to be interesting to see how they continue they've had a relatively good run of defenses in Conference USA. It's going to be interesting with the personnel, see how they fit it into their defensive style, to see how they do it this year.
Well, let's dig into the position rooms on that defense. And let's start with the guys up front along the defensive line. While this group lost some good talent to the portal, TJ Bush coming off the edge, Chris Bodie from the interior of the line, they do return the likes of CJ Bezel Jr., you mentioned earlier, and Bryce Dixon on the inside. Couple them with a good amount of guys who saw some action in 2024. And despite the losses, the group does look like it's in fairly decent shape heading into the season. What do you expect for this unit here in 2025, and how do they look in the spring?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. They looked pretty good in the spring, but then, like you mentioned, a lot of those guys left after the spring portal opened. So what we saw from them in the spring is not what we're going to see in the fall. So we're kind of flying blind when we're talking about the defensive line a little bit in this case. But you mentioned they've just been accumulating. The hits came, and once the hits came, I think they sat down and said, all right, here, we just need to get some dudes in here and start filling some bodies. And they did that. They got a guy like Aaron Hester from Florida State, who's going to be an important player for them. Marcus Clark is somebody they brought in during the winter portal period, who's going to be an important piece on the defensive line. DJ Jackson, another one of those. The answer on the defensive line is going to have to come from within, though. I mean, we mentioned the portal. You can't go find talent like TJ Bush if you're a Liberty in the transfer portal. And so you're not going to be able to replace him, unfortunately, at this time of the year. And same for a guy like Elite Nairn and Chris Bodie. Those are guys who really plugged up the middle and did a really good job of stopping the run defense for Liberty. I thought Elite Nairn was one of the more underrated players on the team last year, just because of his ability to, anytime he got in the game, he could basically impact it. And so I think that was a bigger loss than a lot of people will realize up the middle. But there's talent on this roster. There are guys back who can have important roles. And I think CJ Bazille is somebody who was a preseason Conference USA Player of the Year last year, and it shocked even the coaching staff. I don't want to say it stunned them, but Jamie Chadwell mentioned last year, like, I was a little bit surprised to see him win that. And I think it just kind of speaks to the expectations he had last year. And I think Bazille had a great year last year. I think there's another step for him. I think if he's really going to elevate himself into that face of the defense kind of position, I think he needs to elevate that sack total. That's something that the entire defense as a whole needs to do. In the 2 years under Jamie Chadwell, hasn't necessarily been something that they've been known for, is getting after the quarterback. And so I think Bazille is somebody who can be the answer to that this year in the absence of TJ Bush, because he was expected to be that at first. And so that puts a lot of weight on Bazille, the joker position, but I think he can shoulder it. He's a really high quality player.
Is there anyone on the interior you think that can kind of take that next step up, or a jump from last year and kind of be an impact player in 2025?
Yeah, Bryce Dixon is somebody who isn't obviously going to surprise Flames fans. He's been an important piece of the team. He actually got in the transfer portal this year, and then decided to come back after some other defensive line changes. And so, if you want to call that an addition, technically he left and technically he came back, so you can call that a portal addition, I guess, these days. But he's somebody who I think is going to be important for them, just because that's a position that they have so much attrition now, and he's one of the few faces who has a whole lot of experience. You mentioned Bodie and Nairn who are gone. Jay Hardy's also gone. He's somebody who transferred and is going back to Auburn. And so the losses on the defensive tackle position is where it's really starting to add up for Liberty. Dixon has a lot of experience. I think they're going to have to count on him. Mike Jarvis, he's going to be a really important player this year, also right beside Bryce Dixon on the defensive tackle position. So this is kind of like offensive line. They're going to need some people to step up and kind of figure out their roles in the situation that they want to be in on the defensive line really early in the season, because the tests for Conference USA at least are coming kind of early in Jacksonville State.
The linebacking group loses a ton of production from 2024. The Flames graduate 4 guys who logged snaps last season. This room's highlighted by the return of team's leading tackler from a year ago in Joseph Carter. How did Liberty address these losses?
They addressed him with some big time transfers. Actually, you mentioned Joseph Carter. He's the only guy coming back in this position you can truly kind of count on to be really big time for them. Aiden Vaughn is somebody, he comes back this year. Who he was a really high quality player for them last year. When he got on the field, there were some really good players at linebacker last year, but Joseph Carter kind of stood out above everybody on the team. And so whenever you go into the portal this year, you get somebody like Micah Pollard and Deuce Spurlock who come down for the power conference level. I think those are going to be a couple guys who are really important at the linebacker level for Liberty next year. Spurlock is a huge guy. I think I watched him in the spring game. I was super impressed with the size that he can bring at the position and kind of the physicality too. So it's going to be interesting to see how he plays in alongside Carter, if you watched Liberty games last year, he was all over the field. I mean, to be their leading tackler, somebody who has been in this program for quite a while, I think it was really impressive to see him step up into the position that he did, because they lost Tyron Dupree in 2023, who was Conference Player of the Year. So Carter was somebody who knew he had to step into a big role, and he did it, and he obviously became the leading tackler on the team. They're going to hope that somebody else can step into a situation like that. I think Spurlock and I think Pollard are a couple guys who could do that. Darrell Farrar, somebody they added here in the spring portal, might be able to impact that position as well. And then I think Ethan Crisp is somebody who kind of plays a little bit of safety, little bit of linebacker. Very huge game at Middle Tennessee State last year for Liberty, and it's a situation where if he's going to find himself on the field, he can make plays whether he's playing at the back level or at the linebacker level. And so I think whenever Liberty's defense, obviously Joe Carter is going to be the captain and the heart of the defense at linebacker again. So getting this team to really have some new faces kind of evolve there at linebacker is going to be the important part for them.
Moving over to the defensive backfield, several key pieces returning here in 2025. And in fact, I would say that this starting backfield all saw at least 8 games of action in 2024. It looks maybe it's going to be the strength of this defense, at least early on. But what should we expect from the defensive backfield here in 2025?
I think you can expect it to be their strength. You nailed it. It's the only unit that hasn't seen mass attrition to the transfer portal for Liberty. And linebacker is different, but linebacker, there wasn't quite the talent that they have on the defensive end or in the defensive backfield. When you think about Brylan Green, somebody who was a huge player for them in 2023, with all the interceptions that he had, putting on the Joker mask all those times. And then last year, he had a concussion, took a step back. So it was a little bit of a different year for him, but I think he's going to be such an important player for them, not just on the defensive side of the ball, but on special teams too, because he, plays really well in the punt return game. So Brylan Green is somebody to, certainly keep your eye on this year as somebody, maybe even be a potential candidate to really elevate himself into potential defensive player of the year conversations. If he can take the step up that he kind of has had in the trajectory that he's kind of shown. This position, like you mentioned, is going to be the strength. At cornerback, at safety, it's really flexible how they like to run their defenses, and they take a lot of pride in it. There are some guys who have changed some positions just because of the way that they run it and their flexibility. So I think there's some excitement around guys like Christian Bodner, who's making a move, to cornerback. So I think you mentioned strength. It's going to be, can Liberty stop the run enough to get teams off throwing, to make teams throw against them where they can create some havoc with some of the really talented, defensive backs that they have.
Well, you mentioned Green. Is there anyone else you kind of feel is poised to kind of take a big jump here in 2025?
Yeah, there's a few. This is obviously it's an experienced side of the ball, so I think there are quite a few guys who are kind of getting to the back half of their career, and I feel like maybe their talents kind of matching up with their physical ability, and they can really take that step forward. I think the top guys, Corey Jones, who he's played a big role in the defense in recent years. I mean, he played 12 games last year. He's really important at safety, but I think alongside a guy like Brylan Green, Jones is going to, maybe he doesn't get as much shine as he should. I think he was a really high quality player for them last year in the defensive back end. He shows up, pretty much in every play that you need him to in the passing game. So I think he's somebody who, whenever Liberty if Liberty has a lot of success in 2025, and you look back on the season, defensive wise at least, it's gonna start with the defensive backfield and Green, obviously, and then you're gonna need somebody to step up beside him. And I think Jones certainly has the talent and has shown in flashes during his time at Liberty that he could potentially do that. And then a couple other guys, I think could really step up would be Bodner, who's moving around in the secondary to cornerback. He, had a huge interception against FIU last year. That was a game-winning pick in overtime. And then he pretty much missed the rest of the year with an illness. He's back. He's kind of built his strength back. So I think with him moving into a new position, I think he's going to have a big role. And then Eli August, he was a former walk-on. He kind of got himself onto the field in a few situations last year and impressed. And he's kind of an upperclassman now. And so I think he's going to have a little bit of a bigger role. And I think they're going to count on him more than they ever have. Obviously, with him being on scholarship now, to have to, bring something to the back end of this defense.
Well, you talked about it with Bryson Green. Or Brylan Green, I'm sorry. We also saw it in the introduction video, but what can you tell us about, the turnover celebrations and, the fans that call themselves the Liberty Jokers?
The Jokers are crazy. Yeah. So the Jokers sit front row. You can't miss them. They're there 30 minutes early now. They actually can get in. Some of the fans, they let them in a little bit early. So they're in there with the lunatics, is what they call themselves. And so the Jokers get in there. They get on the front row. They paint themselves up. Have you guys been to a Liberty home game? Have you ever been to Williams Stadium? The visiting sideline is no more than 15 feet from the front row of the student section. And so these Jokers are in the players' ear. They're giving them everything they can, I guess, in a Liberty way fashion. And so it's a good environment. And then obviously, if there's an interception, everybody loses their mind on Liberty's defense. They get the Joker mask out, which is a playoff of the Joker fans, obviously. And they go to the sideline. Everybody's seen it. Put the ball in the bag. Water spraying everywhere, Joker mask. It's awesome. It's exciting. They didn't do it as much last year as they probably had hoped, at least as much as they did 2 years ago. But I think that with the talent in the backfield, I mean, there's some hope that they might be able to do it a few more times this year.
Well, if you had
Brylan Green basically lived in it 2 years ago.
Well, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be as much of a breakout, I guess, because he was a former preseason defensive player there. But I think CJ Bazile, because of the volume that he's going to be able to play, and because of what he can do, and because of what he's going to be asked to do by this coaching staff, I think he's going to be a potential Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And so I think he's going to be somebody that people talk about not just being one of the best defenders in Conference USA, but maybe even in the Group of 5 level next year, at this time next year. So I think Bazile will have a really special 2025 for this defense.
Well, let's move over to the special teams and how those units look. And are there any concerns?
There's always concern at kicker in college, I think, just because, it's hard to trust college kickers. It's hard to trust them in Liberty's case even more because now they don't have their kicker back from last year. And so they're really shuffling right now. They just recently got a commitment from Wake Forest transfer Tyler Black, who didn't really kick a whole lot at Wake Forest. He was kind of more of a kickoff specialist for the Demon Deacons. And so he's going to be a part of the kicking conversation with Braden Beck, who comes back for Liberty. Last year's kicker, Colin Carhew, he ran out of eligibility. He did a pretty decent job, I think, after Chadwell's first season in Lynchburg. There were some frustrations around the kicking game. And I think Carhew did a good enough job to just not get noticed, I guess, is what, if you're a kicker, to kind of, is what you want to guide or, rate your success on, is the coach not noticing me for doing bad things. And so I think Carhew was very good last year. He's going to be tough to replace. But Black and Braden Beck are going to be, kind of at the heart of that competition this year, I feel like. And then at punter, nobody wants to talk about punter, but punters are people too, obviously. And Max Morgan has been at Liberty for some time, and he's back this year. He's going to be running the punt game. He, in recent years, he's also handled, or last year at least, he handled kickoff duties as well, and did a pretty good job at it. And so, Max Morgan is somebody that's going to be important for them in the punt game. He had some bombs. I think he had a 60-yard punt last year. He's a really good punter. And like you mentioned, he's somebody also that he probably hopes the coaching staff doesn't notice. You don't want to get caught by the coaching staff if you're the punter.
Well, now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
Yeah, I think just because at the end of spring, I would have said that defensive line would have been the strength of the team, and then a month and a half later, I think it's the biggest concern on the team, just because the attrition that went into the portal, and the situations they're looking at now with having to replace so much talent, and with the lack of ability and a lack of time really to replace some of the talent that they have lost, and so defensive line is going to be the biggest question for this team, I think, going into the season, seeing how some of these new faces that they're bringing in to plug the holes left by TJ Bush and Bodie and Elite Nairn and a lot of those guys, seeing how quickly those guys can get up to speed. Because Jacksonville State, we mentioned, they're coming in, they're going to Jacksonville State on September 6th. That's a team that likes to run the ball. At least they did under, Rich Rodriguez last year. So if they're going to be running the ball, Liberty's got to have a way to stop it. And if they don't have the ability or the talent or the manpower, at least, be able to plug the middle against a team like Jacksonville State, and maybe looking at 0-1 in conference play before, right after Labor Day. So that's going to be, I think, a very tough position for Liberty to be able to get up to speed on quickly as defensive line. So I think there's be a lot of concerns about that.
In today's age of NIL revenue sharing and the transfer portal, how has it changed Liberty's recruiting philosophy?
Yeah, I think obviously, like a lot of teams, they do a lot more work in the transfer portal than anywhere else. Liberty has been unique in the last, at least in the seasons I've been here, and under Chadwell, that they really do a lot of work in the JUCO ranks. And they landed a junior college commitment here in the spring portal. They had a couple of guys on the team last year who are junior college guys. They really work the junior college ranks a lot. And I'm not sure if that's, specific just to the transfer portal era and not, wanting to necessarily sit around and wait for high school seniors to develop. I think if you have the opportunity to go get a guy who played for 2 years at junior college and is 6'6" and 340 already, and you don't have to do the weight building for the kid, I think it makes a lot more sense to go get a junior college offensive lineman than a senior out of high school. And so I think that's where they've been the most active compared. Now, they obviously are very active in high school. They have 7 commitments in the class of 2026 already. Some of it, actually most of it on the defensive side of the ball to kind of fill some defensive line holes that I think they have popped up here in the last year or so. So obviously, I think this is a program who has a lot of resources. I think they recruit differently than a lot of Group of 5 teams. I think they, move differently in the NIL space. I think they're going to move a little bit differently in the rev share space than a lot of G5 teams. And so maybe things will change once the House settlement kind of once we know it's for sure going in. But for now, I think Liberty does a really good job of spreading out and even, like I said, tapping into the JUCO ranks, because there's a lot of talent in that ranks. I mean, you think about some of the guys who got drafted in the NFL draft last month. Some of those guys played in junior college. So,
well, we talked earlier about 2 years in a row they've signed the highest rated quarterback that they ever have. Given the transfer portal and P4s seem to kind of really restocking their rosters with those transfers, are you seeing Liberty kind of have access to maybe a higher level recruit than you think they have in the past?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think obviously before coming here, Hugh Freeze was the head coach. Before I started covering Liberty, he was the head coach for a few years. And you talk about the higher level of talent. I think Hugh Freeze had the ability to tap into even a different level of talent that Jamie Chadwell has been able to. And Jamie Chadwell has done a really good job coaching this team up. I think last year, every year since Hugh Freeze left, I think there's been, most people will tell you there's been a little bit less talent, year by year, just because of how much talent was on the team when Hugh Freeze was here. And so I think Chadwell's done a better job of coaching it up specifically. And in comparison to other Group of 5 teams, I think they have a little bit more access to some higher quality players. And I think you can see it. Maybe, Liberty isn't in a situation to get a guy like Caden Salter if they don't have the resources to go get a coach like Hugh Freeze and put themselves in that situation. So it's not necessarily just, spending more in the NIL space where I feel like they can find an advantage. They do it in a lot of other ways. They have a lot of great facilities. If you've been to Liberty's campus and you've seen their football facilities, it really does rival. It isn't just cliche. It really does rival a lot of power conference programs. The facilities that they have at Liberty. So I think it's a situation where they don't just do it in the NIL space. Like I said, they do it in a lot of areas that really helps them be versatile and access some of the talent they have, which keeps them, at least for the time being, a top conference USA.
Well, Bryson, how do you feel the staff at Liberty is doing navigating the portal?
I think they've done a good job. It's tough to give them a really good grade here in the spring whenever you lose the guys that you lost. That's just talent that's talent that Group of 5 teams don't really have access to that just got out the door, and it's so late in the season that you don't really have the time to replace them. And so I think they've done a really good job in navigating guys coming in for the most part. There have been some really good players on defense last year who came in from the portal. I think that's what they're hoping again this year with guys like Spurlock and Pollard at linebacker, that they can trust their development and their scouting eyes, and bring in guys who maybe didn't play as much at the top levels. And maybe, hey, it's one small fix that we can make and unlock this guy into becoming a Conference USA all-conference guy, as opposed to him just being, a mediocre guy at the power conference level. So they've done a good job of navigating ins and outs. They've addressed all the positional needs that they need to at this point. I think you mentioned all the attrition at defensive line. I think they have enough people on the roster now to be able to go into camp and feel confident about themselves. At quarterback, obviously the most important position on the field, they have plenty of answers, or at least plenty of guys who they think could be answers. And so they've stocked up. They have plenty of players who they can try and see if they're the right answers to the solutions that they need. And I think this is a coaching staff who is starting to kind of come into their own here. What's going to be their third year, right? The first year, you could say maybe it was a lot of Hugh Freeze's players sticking around. I think Jamie Chadwell did a phenomenal job. I don't think there are many coaches in the country who could have coached a team, even in Liberty situation that year, to the the win that they had and the way that they did it. And so after that year, coming into last year, it was a little bit up and down. I think they really kind of see the vision and they want to trust themselves and trust their ability to pick guys out. And I think they're going to be taking some bets on some of their guys on the roster this year.
What do you think the main strength of this 2025 Liberty team will be?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Like I said, I'm 3 weeks ago, I would have said defensive line without a question. It's hard to say wide receiver might be a strength when it was such a big question mark last year, but I think it's an area that will be a positive for this team. Overall strength, though, I guess I'll have to go with the defensive back end of the secondary, just because of the talent that's there with a guy like Brylan Green, and also Corey Jones, who's a really talented player too in his own right. So I would say the defensive secondary. If you make me say aside on the offense, man, just because of the coaching ability of Bill Durkin, I think he might be able to get the offensive line, rolling by week 3 or 4 into what it's looked like the last 2 years. So there's a strength on each side of the ball for you.
Bryson, what does success look like for the Flames in 2025?
Yeah, I think a success, obviously, extending the program's bowl streak. They've every year they've been eligible to go bowling, and since they joined the FBS, they've been that. So that's number one. That's step one, is get to a bowl game, continue that streak. Jamie Chadwell's mentioned so many times over the last year or so, or at least at the end of last season, how he didn't want to be the coach that broke the bowl game streak. And so it was important to him to keep that. That's going to be step one. But I think getting back to the Conference USA championship is actually a real measure of success for this team, because this team can win 6 games. That's awesome. Bowl game is a big deal, but whenever Liberty, has put the resources into the team, into the program that they do, I feel like they want to see a little bit more return than just 6 wins. And so, and particularly the fans do. I think you can certainly count on that. And I think returning the Conference USA championship game would be a success. I think winning it would probably be an actual success, because given there's a lot of question marks around Conference USA. Western Kentucky is going to be really talented, but I think with the coaching ability of Liberty and the talent that they do have in certain positions, getting to that game and giving yourself an opportunity to win the league, anything less than that is probably not a successful season, in my opinion.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, Bryson, but is there anything else you want to share or think we should know about this 2025 Liberty Flames football team?
Yeah, one thing I want to mention, there's been a lot of talk about the talent that's left the door. I think the one thing to watch with this Liberty team is how they mesh. Because if you watch the Liberty team last year, and you watch Caden Salter and you watch Quentin Cooley and a lot of the guys interact and how they played, maybe it wasn't the closest team, I would say. I think it was pretty obvious when you watch it, and there were some ups and downs. I don't want to say there were chemistry issues. That's probably not true, but I think there were some frustrations last year with how the season went. And so what that kind of caused is some, players going, being frustrated with each other late in the season. I think with this team, you're going to see a more cohesive unit, a team that kind of fits together a little bit more. Just based off of what we've seen in spring, I think the players have talked about the excitement of everybody that actually wants to, quote, we all want to be here is what they've said. Everybody in this building is here with a purpose now. The players who don't want to be here, they've all left, and everybody here wants to win and wants to get back to what they did in 2023 is what they've all said throughout spring. And Jamie Chadwell even mentioned, he went on a podcast with the school recently and talked about the end of last season and said, it didn't really go how we thought, but there's some things that we can be better at, and there's some areas that we can improve at to be better overall. And so perhaps they're not a more talented team than they were last year, but perhaps they're a better, some of their parts. And I think that's probably going to be the case with this team. They're not going to have the dynamic quarterback at Caden Salter, but maybe a step down at quarterback and a step up everywhere else. You might be able to help this team become. Winning 9 games would be an improvement on last year. So I think that's possible with, even though they have lost talent, I think the togetherness of this team could get them to that point.
Well, Bryson, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. I can't wait for football season. Let's go.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.